Welcome to Lunch and Learn, a collaborative effort between Parents Helping Parents and Morrissey-Compton Educational Center in Redwood City. We're really excited about working together. We're both nonprofits and we both love to help the community get information about topics that impact their school-age children. Today's topic is addressing anxiety in the classroom, and I'm lucky to be joined by Dr. Ariel Marrero, licensed psychologist at Morrissey-Compton. Welcome, Ariel.
Hi, thanks, Marley. Hi, everyone. I am excited to be here to talk about addressing anxiety in the classroom. Hopefully this popped up for everyone. But we are going to talk about just how to work with teachers to address your child's anxiety when it manifests in the classroom. And this can be with a lot of different ways through meetings and coming up with specialized interventions for your child, just how to go through all of that. And so just to go through just a couple of pieces just about Morrissey-Compton. So we are a nonprofit organization in Redwood City, and we've been providing a host of services for a long time, around over 30 years. And we provide a host of services, including psychoeducational evaluations. We do provide psychotherapy, educational tutoring, executive function coaching, and consultation services. So we can be kind of a one-stop shop regarding mental health and educational needs. We also provide scholarships for those who are struggling with access to mental health and educational services. And that's kind of what we're known for. So, we can provide for those who may struggle to pay full price for things. So what we're going to get into today, just to give you some information. So I'm going to go into kind of why should we partner with the school, right? Why should we involve them in understanding our child's anxiety and have them as part of the team? Then I'll go into just the system of school-based help and what that looks like, and I'll be oriented to who the players are, who can help, what does that help look like. I'll specifically give you some information on what that collaboration process looks like. So how do you go from having a concern about anxiety to then moving forward to implementing a plan? We'll go over specific strategies for supporting anxious students. We will talk about school placement, communication with the school, disagreements, and what can act as barriers to collaboration. And then lastly, just main takeaways as to what are the pieces that I definitely emphasize when parents are going to be working with the school to meet their child's needs. Okay. So first, why partner with the school, right? Your child may have anxiety, and if we think about just where they're spending most of their time, kids spend a long amount of time at school during the week, 35 to 45 hours. And that's not even including if they're doing groups or activities or sports, but school is just an important part of their day and it's an important part of their week. And so they're seeing all these people at school, and it's unfortunately kids don't exist in bubbles. And so the anxiety that they have, they bring it with them to school. And so it can unfortunately have an impact on their schooling. And since they spend so much time and it can pop up in this environment, we want to include all the important players in kids' lives, and that includes their teachers and school staff. And what's really nice is that there are so many resources available for families at school that, a lot of caregivers don't even realize is available for them. So there is both just the people that are there, it's an important environment, but also there's a lot that is there that is, of course, free as well. So that is pretty important too. So just to bring it back to how anxiety impacts learning. So anxiety doesn't stay at home, right? And unfortunately, it impacts their school performance. So it can impact a lot of different areas of school functioning. So it can impact their grades, it can impact test performance, their memory for learned material. They may just not want to participate in class. Their ability to build relationships both with teachers and with other kids can be impacted. They can just not want to learn, unfortunately, and feel like school is just not a good place for them. And then low confidence in abilities. Anxiety, it can manifest in a lot of different ways. So this can be behavioral, and this could be like outbursts, bathroom accidents, difficulty separating, crying, work refusal. It can be some of these cognitive components, like I just said, like memory, just feeling like school is a really negative place, having negative self-talk about school. Can also just have these academic impacts as well, grades, poor performance on tests, that testing and anxiety. And so it can definitely have an impact. And so this is why it's an important, why addressing anxiety in the classroom is so important, because it can have a significant impact. So I wanted to bring into just some myths about partnering with the school, because I think that unfortunately a lot of caregivers just have these ideas about school that aren't necessarily realistic. And so I want to make sure I dispel these myths. So one is that schools only provide academic supports, and that is 100% not accurate. Schools have a lot of resources regarding socio-emotional support, social skills support, and mental health needs that are definitely available and are free to families. If I share my child's struggles, teachers will look at them differently. Absolutely not. Teachers want to help. They love your kids. They want to help. They're an important part of their lives. And so they want to do whatever they can to help make them successful. The school does not care about mental health. Absolutely not true. Mental health is an important part of academic success, right? If we feel good, we're going to do better. And so schools, of course, it matters to them how their students are feeling when they're there. And then lastly, parents and teachers are on different sides or teams, and that is not accurate as well. We're all on the same side of wanting to make sure that students are successful, that they're happy, healthy, and feeling good about school. And so we're all working towards the same goal of having the student at the center and wanting what is going to help them perform best. So put a red little mark on them, because these are myths. They're not true. The schools want to help, and they're there for parents. So just some orientation to the players at school, right? Who can help? There's a lot of people at school, and there may be people that you don't realize that their jobs are there to help specifically with mental health needs. So we have, right, our gen ed teachers, your child's teacher, special education teachers, teaching assistants or aides in the classroom. But we also have the school counselor, school psychologist, the school social worker who are trained in mental health and socio-emotional concerns. We also have principals, assistant principals who are also there to provide support and care for the kids. This is by no means an exhaustive list. There are, I've seen schools be really creative with who can be there as part of the planning for the child. Can involve the nurse, the special education director, office secretary, janitor, cafeteria worker. We can be really creative with who can be supportive for the child. And again, this team is going to vary, and the people who are available at the school to help will vary depending on your school, your location, and the need of the child. So there are some schools that have more people, some schools who have less. Some schools may have contracted people that they bring in, which can also be a support to the child. And then the system of supports at school. So I just wanted to give you a kind of a brief orientation as to how supports work at school for mental health needs like anxiety. So they use a tiered system. And if we look at, there's tier 1, which is universal supports. And these are going to be the supports that are for the supports and interventions in place for all students. So these are going to be our classroom-wide and school-wide interventions and programs. So these are things like a lot of schools might have like dollars or bucks that they use for positive behavior that the kids can turn in for like prizes or things like that. General social-emotional learning curriculum that are used for schools, like focusing on expected behavior and things like that. Classroom-wide supports, these are the things that the individual teacher has available for all kids in their classroom. Then we have our tier 2, our targeted supports, and these are going to be for a targeted group of students who are needing a little bit more help than what is available for all students. These are going to be things like small group interventions like counseling groups or skills-based groups, might have a behavior report card that is sent home, a check-in, check-out system, or really just more of a focused plan for that specific child or group of students. Then we have the tier 3, which is our most intensive supports. And these are going to be very individualized. And these are going to be for the students who are really not responding to the other levels of support, who really need more intensive services. So things are like individual counseling, more specialized planning specific for this child's needs. This could be like a safety plan or an elopement plan for if they're running out the classroom. FBA and BIP, a functional behavior analysis, and a behavior intervention plan, which is more for those who are showing really significant behavior that is impacting their learning, modified schedule, and at the most severe, a change of placement. So how do we go from having a concern about a child's anxiety to putting in a plan for how to support them? So first, what caregivers can do is identify the problem. And this can be brought up by a parent, caregiver, it can be brought up by a teacher, or even the student themselves, where somebody is noticing, hey, there is something going on with their anxiety that is having an impact on what they're doing at school. It's having an impact either on just their willingness to go to school, their functioning while they're at school behaviorally, or just their academically, their grades. Maybe you're noticing that the child is just really stressed out when it comes to tests and their grades are starting to tank, or, they're really not wanting to go to school. And so there's some school refusal. Once you have a problem identified, then you communicate the need. So this can be done over conversation, in writing, can be done a lot of ways. This can be done just with a conversation with the teacher to get the process started. It can be an email to the team or to the teacher, principal, during a conference, during an SST meeting, 504 plan if your child has it, or even at the IEP meeting for those that have IEPs. Either way, it's just that you, the parent or the teacher, are communicating there's something going on, and I think we need more help here. So then that results in developing a plan. And so during a plan, this is where everyone gets together. And basically I have a list of bullet points here, but these are some things that you can discuss and plan during this meeting. So this could be a group understanding of the problem and some potential hypotheses for what you think is going on for the child. So maybe they are starting to throw chairs and flip desks or something, but you really think it's when they're feeling insecure and really anxious about performance on tests. So it tends to happen before tests. Goals for intervention. So what do we want to happen, right? We want to see a decrease in certain behavior. We want to see them happier. We want to see grades going up. Skills needed for success. So maybe they just need some anxiety reduction strategies. They need some coping skills, maybe some frustration management. And then some additional pieces like who is going to be involved, what services do they need, counseling, do they not? And then how are we going to measure progress? So how are we going to know what we're putting in is successful, right? Some additional things to think about when meeting with the team and coming up with a plan is what is each team member responsible for? So what is the teacher responsible for versus the school counselor, school psychologist, principal? Who is in charge of contact with the parent, right? So you need to be aware of what's going on. So whose job is it to communicate all of this and what's going on at school with you? How often will data need to be collected on the intervention if it's successful, monitoring? And then who else maybe outside of school is needed for this team? A lot of kids who have anxiety have outside therapists. And so a lot of parents don't realize that you can invite them in and they're an important part of your child's team. So absolutely bring in outside providers. They're very important. I'm also during this portion of developing a plan, you can include the child in the process. That's actually really great in building their advocacy skills, building their awareness of their needs. I've seen kids as young as second grade, so around 8 years old, be a part of this plan development in developmentally appropriate ways, of course. So they're more towards the end on what do they need to be successful at school? What do they think is the most where are they struggling with the most? So kids can definitely be included when appropriate and if they can handle it. And then lastly, right, we implement the plan and then we reassess. So we put forth the interventions that are come up. We want to focus on consistency, right? If we want to see their anxiety reduce and we want to see improved behavior, there has to be consistent implementation of what we talked about. Clear communication between home and school, and then basically meeting again in about 6 to 8 weeks to review, is this working? Is my child benefiting? Are they feeling better? Are they performing better? And during this whole collaboration process, I really encourage caregivers to be very open about what's going on. At home, if they've gotten any previous evaluations, you do want to share that with the school, any diagnostic letters from therapists, if your child is on medication, not on medication, and what kind of outside services your child is having, right? The best plan that we can have is when parents are really open about what's going on. That way the school can get all the information and come up with a plan for help. Strategies, kind of general strategies for supporting anxious students. So those that are anxious, and again, there's a wide range of what anxiety can look like. We have that generalized anxiety. So these kids who are just very anxious all around, socially anxious kids. We have those who are really panicky. We have kids who might be selectively mute or have a lot of separation anxiety. what's going to be really important for them, regardless of the kind of anxiety that they're experiencing, is physical and emotional safety, right? We need to show them that school is a safe place for them, that they're not going to be hurt, they're not going to be bullied, that they are going to be supported and loved in the same way they are at home. And part of that emotional safety is making it known to them that it's okay to be anxious and that we can hold you, we can support that, we can hold that anxiety for you and help figure out what to do with it, right? It's not just they have to deal with it all on their own. What's going to be really important for these kind of kids as well is clear expectations and routines and boundaries. So knowing what to expect, knowing exactly what's going to happen, and having predictability is going to minimize anxiety. And while it's important to be understanding, we also want to have really clear boundaries for what is acceptable and not acceptable at school, right? So it is not acceptable to be aggressive, to be violent, to have unkind words. Those will not be tolerated. It doesn't mean we're not going to support them through it or not understand that they're dealing with it, but we also have to let them know, like, it's, that's not allowed in this type of environment, and we're not going to let you put other students at risk. So I've seen for some kids, some kind of basic things, like just even having a visual schedule, so that way they know of like what's going to happen, what they can anticipate, the upcoming transitions, knowing what time is going to happen for those kids that are just really anxious about what's going to happen next. Having really clear class rules and having the kids be a part of that can also be really helpful. We're kind to ourselves, to others. We are kind to our items too. We're not destroying them. We're not snapping them. And we work hard and we don't give up. Some additional strategies general for supporting anxious students. What is going to be really important at school is to have a safe person for them to go to. Often this is a counselor, or the social worker, school psychologist, but this is one person who they can go to that can be outside of the classroom, that they can go to when they're feeling really anxious, that will be able to hold and contain their anxiety. We'll be able to help them regulate. We'll be able to help them cope, can help them take a break for a second to decompress, and then can send them back. But they know that this person has them. This is their person. Creating an anxiety plan is going to be really important too. And this is going to be, as part of that plan, identifying triggers. So what are the things that make them most anxious? Having proactive versus reactive support. So before a trigger versus after a crisis. So like modifying the environment, what can we do to change things versus what do we do then after, they get really anxious and have an outburst. And then specifically highlighting coping strategies for the child to be aware of. So deep breathing, coloring, distraction, muscle relaxation, asking for help. What are things that a child can expect to do when, what they can know when they are feeling anxious? And this should be really clear to the student. Often it's great to do it with them. It should be done with them, so that way they have a part of it, part in it, and feel, really good about the plan. Adult modeling teachers can be really great at just modeling how to manage anxiety in the classroom. So just even I've seen some teachers be really great as to like have kids work through a really quick deep breathing before tests, talking about their own anxiety, how they cope with it, can be really, really helpful on just showing, what do you do when you have all these big feelings? Kids are looking to adults for guidance. And so teachers and adults at school can model how to do that effectively. It's also important for teachers and staff at school to know what are helpful versus hurtful responses. So things like validation, empathy, acknowledgement, like, oh my goodness, I can see this is so hard for you. That's going to be really helpful. What's going to be unhelpful responses from the staff are things like, oh, well, it's not that big a deal. Just stop being anxious. Just get over it. Those things are not going to be helpful. And so knowing what is going to be specifically good and bad for your child and what they're going to respond to is really helpful for the school to know as well. And then ultimately for those students who are really struggling, a de-escalation plan is going to be important for just what to do for safety. If they have issues like running out the classroom, or if they're aggressive, just what to do. How do we de-escalate them? What is really important for you and the school to be on the same page about is just when is the appropriate time to intervene for your child. If we look at the escalation cycle, right, we know kids are calm, then they're triggered by something that is anxiety provoking. They get agitated, accelerate, they peak with the meltdowns, the outbursts, just the panic, then they de-escalate, and then they kind of return to baseline. And so The worst time to try and intervene with reason and logic for a child is during this peak moment of the most intense anxiety they're experiencing. Their brain is shutting down at this point, and the logical part of their brain is shutting down, and they are just feeling pure emotion. So that is not the appropriate time to try and teach them a coping skill because they can't hear it. And so what is going to be the peak moments to intervene for that skill building, for those coping, for how to reason and logic with them is during the calm times before a trigger and after during that recovery phase when they are not just running on pure emotion and are able to listen to what you're saying. What is going to be helpful during those trigger and agitation phases is switching to kind of de-escalation strategies. So teachers redirecting, distracting, knowing to what not to say that's going to accelerate them, things like that. And when we want kids to be able to build those skills, we want to follow the 3 R's that I have here on this side. So regulate, relate, and reason. So if we want kids to be able to cope with their anxiety, we have to first regulate them to make sure that they are at a baseline, to connect with them via relationship, and then work on reasoning. Until kids go through that, until they're regulated and feel connected with adults, they're not going to be able to build on those skills that we need them to. So it's important for parents to be on the same page with teachers about this and have this as part of their plan. Just want to go through some basic kind of tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3 interventions that schools can offer for your child. And again, this is by no means exhaustive list because I've seen schools be amazingly creative with everything they come up with for their students. But some classrooms will often have like a calm down corner, which will be a spot in the classroom that they have nice sensory items, cool materials that kids can use that's available for every child to use when they are anxious, just a spot they can go to. Mindfulness lessons. Mindfulness is really, really great for anxiety. And so I've seen some classrooms, especially at the elementary level, will have like little either lessons or things in the morning, just teaching them about deep breathing, maybe some yoga poses, things like that. Emotion temperature checks. I love when classrooms do this, where basically teachers are kind of taking a snapshot as to how students are feeling in that moment for all the students. So this can be done with these little clip charts, or even I've seen teachers give kids Post-it notes, and they just either put a face or a word for how they're feeling, and they put it on the board. And it's a way to just get a sense to have kids check in, but also to monitor, okay, are the kids feeling really anxious right now? Then I can work them through like some mindfulness that we're learning about, or just get a sense of where the kids are. Then we have things like socio-emotional learning lessons, guidance lessons, which are often run by the school counselor or school social worker, sometimes even school psychologists. But again, working to teach kids about their bodies, their brains, their emotions, and giving them language. I've even seen like kindergarten classrooms learn about the brain and flipping your lid, and how when you are really anxious or upset that you are just running on pure emotion and just on those big feelings. So it's hard to cope with. Even things like morning meetings can be really helpful. I worked at a school where they did a morning meeting, every meeting for all grade levels, and it worked really well with the kids because they worked on a mindfulness component. Kids could share how they were feeling that moment in that morning. Also taught some coping skills each morning as well. They would practice like just taking deep breaths for a little bit. These are all going to be really great interventions that can help with anxiety at the kind of universal classroom-wide level. Then we have some things like check-in, check-out, which is a bit more for those who are struggling, kids who are struggling and not responding so much to tier 1. Check-in, check-out with their anxiety. They meet with someone in the morning, meet with someone at the end of the day on just like, what are we going to remember to do this day, right? Focus on coping skills or behavior to target. Small groups. So these are things like the counseling groups for anxiety, anger management, social skills as well for those who are socially anxious. Some schools, again, depending on the school, will have special programs like a yoga morning program or a mentoring program, which can be really, really helpful for those with anxiety, and accommodations. So this can be things like, extra time on exams, breaking down assignments. I just spoke with a parent this morning whose child was really anxious about performance on tests. And so even minimizing the amount of spelling words from 15 to 10 made a big difference on reducing her child's anxiety. So there are things that the school can work with parents on for just minimizing and putting accommodations in to lower the anxiety. And we have the tier 3. So this is going to be the most individualized extreme interventions for those who are really struggling. And we have things like individual counseling, individual reward charts, FBA and BIP, like I mentioned before, really specific plan on analyzing their behavior and putting a plan in place. altered schedule. So I worked with one child who was so anxious that even getting him to school was a chore. So he would start off at just having 3 hours a day at school, and then we worked our way up, and that was really helpful for him. Break cards, so giving like kids 3 cards during the day so that way they can leave the classroom in safe, appropriate ways. Social stories, even having a one-on-one aid for some students, they just need it to get through the day. Often at this level, we're evaluating kids for special education to see if they need more assistance. Referral to community services as well if they're not connected with any therapists or anything like that. And then special treatment plans or programs. This could be for those who really need a very specialized programming. So like with another child before, I've had like limited electronic access, like no iPads was just really triggering their anxiety and their meltdown. So we just took it away. And that way it took away a big trigger for them. For those who have a lot of risk issues associated with their anxiety, this is going to be probably right on target, those specialized plans to meet their needs. And again, this is by no means an exhaustive list, right? Schools can be very creative with how to meet the needs of students with anxiety, but we tend to go to the more individualized methods with those tier 3 interventions. School placement. So this can be a question when kids are really struggling and, they've gone through all those individualized interventions and they're still kind of not responding. And for some students, switching schools can be helpful. I've seen it. It's a very small subset of students. Most students are able to, with appropriate support, stay in the school that they're in. But there are some students who just need a different type of environment. And for example, I was talking to the same parent this morning whose child was very anxious that once they switched the child to a different school, it was just a smaller classroom. It was less stress. The staff was more warm and inviting, and her anxiety with school, she wasn't fighting in the morning anymore to go to school. So even small switches like that can be very helpful. Before talking about a new setting, really have a clear understanding of what does not work, right? The only way we know what does work is by knowing what doesn't. So try a lot of options before we get to this point. This really should be at the really end of the line. And for those with IEPs, there are lots of options, but again, that's going to be a team decision. And once you've gone through all of your options, and it's shown that they really can't function without going to a specialized setting. What if you disagree with the school? So ultimately, there's a lot of different strategies, but what the biggest component is to remind yourself that it's you and the school versus the anxiety, not you versus the school. You're both on the same side. You both want the same thing, but ultimately there is compromise that needs to happen. You have to meet in the middle. Sometimes you do have to choose your battles on what is the most important for you right now. Ultimately, especially for some parents who feel like their point isn't being heard, sticking to the facts and the data is really great and can really emphasize. Sometimes emotion gets into it a lot. And so returning back to what are we seeing data-wise for the child and their anxiety will be helpful with just illustrating your point. And ultimately, for those with IEPs, it's really important to know your rights, right? So there's options for mediation, for complaints, and then ultimately due process if you feel like there's too many disagreements with the school and you're not able to be on the same page. But at the most of it, just make sure you're not putting your child in the middle of it. I've seen so many students who are so confused as to why the school and their parents aren't getting along, and it makes them more anxious than they don't want to go to school because it's just so tense for them. So please make sure to leave the child out of it. Barriers to communication. So it's not going to go well if everyone is blaming each other, if there is miscommunication. The miscommunication is often the piece that I see just disrupts teams the most, that when caregivers think that the school is thinking about them in some type of way, or something was communicated in a wrong way, that message gets lost, and then everyone reacts on emotions, and the child is the one who gets harmed. Reacting out of emotion rather than responding out of kind of a logical point of view. And then having different views of the child's needs. When everyone is on different pages, then there's going to be conflict. But ultimately, what's going to be important is to just be on the same page and to work on that relationship with the school. Lastly, main takeaways. I know that was a lot of information, but ultimately, you as a parent are a very, very important part of the team. You are the expert on your child. The school knows education, but you know your child best. So you know what is going to work for them, and being proactive rather than reactive. So if you notice that there are things coming up now, speak to the school early rather than waiting for those big meltdowns to happen. Do it beforehand, right? Your child already has anxiety and they're starting kindergarten, talk to the school before they start. remaining open and honest, right? We have to know what's going on with the child at home in order to be able to help. So if they've got diagnoses, there's things going on, please be honest. And then ultimately, right, a one-size-fits-all approach is not going to work. Every child is different. And so support plans should grow and change with your child. Your child's needs in kindergarten are not the same when they're in fourth grade, and they're not the same when they're in high school. So making sure that you're working with the school to reevaluate and see how it should change as they go up, from lower elementary school to upper elementary school is going to be important. And including student input during that process as they age as well is going to be important. And so ultimately, that is kind of a wrap up. I know it was a lot of information, but I think we have some time for questions and everything at the end. Ultimately, for anxiety, right, partnering with the school is going to be the most important part, and how you can really just be on the same page, because they want to help, you want to help, get creative, get fun with it.
Okay, this is the second time you've presented with us, and you just do a beautiful job. So thank you for everything you shared today. I think it was really powerful for our families. And we will be putting this in our e-learning library so other people can refer to it later. So, okay, let's move into your questions. I think I'm going to start with this one because I really love it. What can we do to empower our children to be part of their own advocacy?
That is such a great question, because we want, right, even though they're little now, starting with kindergarten and first, we want them to grow into middle schoolers and high schools who are aware of what their needs are, and that insightfulness is important. And so including them in the conversation in developmentally appropriate ways is going to be really important. Like I said, I've had schools as young as second grade, including them at the end of meetings to come in and say, and like, what do you think you need? Have them brainstorm. Kids are really great with their creativity, and you'd be very surprised as to what kids can come up with. That collaborative problem solving is also going to be really great in building their buy-in, right? Kids, if they feel like the adults are putting all these rules and expectations on them, they're going to push back a bit, but including them in the conversation is going to be really important. So asking them questions, trying to get their point of view is going to help build that advocacy and build that insightfulness that will help them become more aware of what they need both at home and at school.
Okay. How do you know when a therapeutic school might be a better fit for my child than public school?
Yeah. So for some students, unfortunately, what we see is that they are just not responding to the interventions that are put in the school that they're in. And so they might need to go to a therapeutic school or something that is more structured, has more mental health supports. And what I say is a good way to go about it is to go through 3 different options before you get to the point of switching schools. Try different programs, try different services, supports, 3 different options, plans, tries in different areas. What is going to be important is to know what really doesn't work, and trying is the only way to know what doesn't work. But if you see that your child has tried all these plans, the school, you and the school, you're struggling with options, they're still escalating, it's getting worse, then a more specialized environment might be appropriate for them. We want to look for a fit between the child and the environment. And sometimes for some students, the environment just is not an appropriate fit. And so switching to a more specialized environment is totally okay. And it's good to know about them. So I would say that if they're not responding, if it's getting worse and you've tried a lot of options, then considering a therapeutic option might be appropriate.
I'm going to just kind of tag on to that. So I think if your child's in a public school setting and you're just not on the same page with your school, one of the greatest strategies I think is to remember is that you can bring anyone with you to a meeting with your school, including an IEP meeting. Absolutely. It can be a family friend who sees your child. It can be a therapist. They could be on the phone and join a meeting. Yes. I know that sometimes, especially for us moms, we get kind of emotional over our kids, and it's just really amazing to have somebody else say the same thing in a meeting without the emotion that we bring to it as moms.
Yes, and they have special advocates that will go with parents to meetings specifically for this part, where they can also bring in a fresh perspective, but also to kind of remove some of the emotion out of it.
Yeah, I know advocates are oftentimes somebody you have to pay. So just know, if you don't want to have to pay someone, you can invite anyone to a meeting at school. Okay, let's see. How about, are there supplements or vitamins that kids can take to reduce anxiety?
There, There are some doctors, this will be referrals to the pediatrician, but there's some doctors who do prescribe some supplements and things like that for related to mood. Of course, when kids feel better, they're going to behave better, like physically better, they'll feel better. And so I can't think of anything in particular off the top of my head, but I know some parents who give the kids like vitamin D or some like multivitamins, and even I think there are some supplements that can specifically help. There are theories to help with mood, but your pediatricians will be a really great resource to ask those questions because they'll be the ones who know the medicine side of it. So definitely, if you're thinking about maybe there might be some supplements or things like that, ask your pediatrician at their next appointment.
Thank you. Any advice on anxiety caused by social learning challenges? I imagine this is really speaking to kind of our kids that really struggle with social issues. Yeah,
for those that have, that struggle socially, school is such an anxiety provoking environment because it's such a social environment, right? You're talking, interacting with the teacher, with the kids, the hall at lunch, recess. Those can be really scary experiences for them. And so social skills interventions are going to be so helpful. And that's more the tier 2 level where they have social skills groups, even for those that are struggling with things like social cues and how to pick up on just the social pieces. Some speech language pathologists have really great social pragmatic groups at this school that you can refer your child for that really focus on like how to have a conversation and how to tell when a friend doesn't want to keep having this conversation, how to make friendships, how to say hi, bye, how to, join and let someone know that you want to play. There are really great groups that are available. And what is helpful is that the adults at school can also help model those social skills. So having those conversations of, right, how do you ask, how do you make a friend? How do you navigate social anxiety? Adults can be really great at modeling that, having those specific conversations with the kids about how to handle that as well, and come up with even like a social plan for what to do when you want to have a friend, when you are feeling socially anxious. Adults can be really helpful, but there's lots of social interventions through school for that as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great topic for any parent to have with their teacher or school, yes, regardless of whether they have an IEP or not.
Yes.
Part of being at school is about social interaction. And so teachers take it really seriously, especially in the elementary school.
Yes. There are also really great books too, that both teachers and you at home can have on just like social anxiety or social skills. I always look at kids' books because they've made some really amazing kids' books that are really low cost that can focus on exactly those areas that you're worried about for your child, but in really fun, developmentally appropriate ways. Kids are reading a story and don't realize they're like learning skill-based things.
If you have any recommendations on what those books are, I would love to put it up with the video in our e-learning library.
Yeah, I can come up.
Yeah, send me a couple. I think that'd be amazing.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. One more question, and it's kind of a long one, so bear with me for a second. What if the school feels that the child is doing so well academically that the mental health portion does not matter as much? Or in other words, this child is gifted, doing work above their grade level, but we're seeing a lot of breakdowns, a lot of perfectionist ideals. And so instead of maybe giving this child more time on a test or tools, they kind of gloss over the fact that they have a little bit of a breakdown if they get one question wrong.
That is a great question because that's often a source of conflict between parents and the school. That often, right, if there is no academic impact, the schools sometimes can be a little bit hesitant to help. But just because a child is doing academically well does not mean that they don't need supports in the school. Behavior is important. And so the fact that the child is having breakdowns and all this stuff, this is a signal. The child is signaling, I need help, I need support. And so what can be really helpful when those instances when they're kind of hesitant to support, get data. The data speaks for itself. When you have, those facts, if you're able to I would keep a log. So how many times is a child being referred to like the office? How many meltdowns are they having per week, per day? What type of class, like what topic is it always happening in it? Is it always during tests? That way you can present to the school with, I'm keeping my own data. Look at what I'm noticing. What are you going to do to support this? And really show them like, look, there is a need here, but you do not need, just because a child is academically doing well, does not mean they don't qualify for supports, right? So yes, I would push, I would provide that data and really emphasize to the school like why you feel like there needs support, and come up with some ideas too, like some things of what you think could be helpful. But in those instances, could be helpful when there is a advocate, someone that come in to also help on your side for that.
Yeah, absolutely. And Parents Helping Parents is great. If you want to call in and talk to one of our ed specialists, we brainstorm with parents every day about these kinds of topics, how to make sure that their kid is, whatever their needs are being addressed, regardless of whether they have an IEP or not.
Yes.
So Ariel, thank you again for talking with us today. This was great information. We love talking to you parents, so please just know we're a free resource. That's why we're here in the community. We're a parent training and information center, so that's what we do, and we love it. Anyhow, thank you again for joining us, and I'll say goodbye. Thanks, everyone.